A indústria química é conhecida mundialmente como um setor estratégico, todos vocês aqui sabem disso. Países fortes não abrem mão de ter uma indústria química forte também. Para se ter competitividade, 2 pontos são decisivos: disponibilidade de matéria-prima e energia. Nesse ano, para falar um pouco sobre o cenário atual e as perspectivas para o futuro em termos de petróleo e de matéria-prima, além de compartilhar com a gente a sua visão sobre como o Brasil pode aproveitar as oportunidades de transformar crises em investimentos produtivos, eu convido ao palco o Sr. Paul Hodges, presidente da International e-Chem. Consultor, ele escreve para a ICES também e é coautor do livro Boom, Bloom and the New Normal, obra que explica como as mudanças demográficas têm levado as demandas globais para novas direções. Hodges escreve regularmente para o jornal Financial Times e ele é mundialmente reconhecido por sua previsão sobre a crise financeira de 2008, além de ser membro convidado do Fórum Econômico Mundial. Então eu peço palmas para ele.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And I would like to congratulate, first of all, the Industry Association on its 20th anniversary. This is a very significant moment. There's also another anniversary that you may not be quite so aware of, which is that this is my the 30th anniversary of my first visit to Brazil. And I was absolutely delighted earlier this morning to meet up with my old friend Michel Hartfeld, who I first met here in Sao Paulo 30 years ago. And what I want to do today is to talk about a couple of things that actually have come out very strongly from the earlier discussions. And I want to make the point that from a number of areas, from sustainability, from demographics, from energy, and all of these things, we are at a turning point in the chemical industry. So that what worked in the past probably won't work in the future. We need to develop new ideas, new ways of working, and new opportunities. I actually myself think this is a terrific opportunity for all of us, and that's really what I want to talk about today. But just a bit of background, just to explain why I think that there is no going back, if you like. We've had 6 years of stimulus from the world central banks, over $30 trillion. I mean, 6 years ago, I didn't know what a trillion was. I just about knew what a billion was. Today, however, we talk about 30 trillion. Oh, yes, it's just pocket money, isn't it? But it has not achieved any kind of recovery. This is a slide from the American Chemistry Council of global capacity utilization, and as you can see, we are 10 percentage points below the average before the crisis. So whatever they've done, it just hasn't worked. What has changed in the last couple of years, and here in Brazil we know this far more than anyone else, as China. President Xi Jinping has come in with his new normal policy, and he has thrown out the old stimulus policy because it wasn't working, and he's moving towards a new society based on a service-led economy based on the mobile internet. And this is, if you think about a sort of ring of fire, the volcanoes around the Pacific, if you think about this concept, what this is doing is this is completely changing the landscape that we are living and working in today. And we look at Brazil, we look at South Africa, we look at Australia, we look at Russia, Middle East, all of these commodity exporting countries which did very well during China's super bubble, if you like, its super cycle. All of these economies are now struggling. And at the same time, we are now seeing the second order effect of this, which is the economies of Europe and the States. Now, it's very likely that next week, Janet Yellen and the Fed will increase interest rates. It doesn't matter. It's 0.025%. She has to increase interest rates because she can't possibly sit there having not raised interest rates, the Fed, for 10 years and have to start, if necessary, during a presidential election campaign. But what I want to talk about today is 3 things of vital importance to the Brazilian chemical industry. And as I say, I've been involved with it and been here many times, and I feel very strongly that this is a great opportunity for us, as well as, obviously, major challenges. So I want to talk about the oil price collapse. Why did we forecast the oil price collapse back in August last year? Why did we do that? It means that the US ethylene and polyethylene expansions are a complete waste of time and will be a disaster, a financial disaster. This has always been our argument, and I'm afraid that the longer it goes on, the worse it will be. I then want to briefly touch on China and why China is so important as the world's second most important economy to what's going on. And then I want to talk about what the demographics and how this gives us great advantage here in Brazil. So we talked about from August last year, I write the ICIS Chemicals and Economy blog. It's been great to meet some readers already this morning. And back in on the 18th of August last year, we said, look, this is it. We are no longer going to see higher oil prices will collapse, and also the US dollar will rise. And as you can see, we've had a very considerable rise take place in the value of the US dollar. We've also had a very considerable fall take place in the oil price. And the oil price is continuing to go down, and we expect at the moment that it will go to $25 and stay there for reasons that I'll discuss in a moment. The US dollar is going higher. At the same time, that green line is very important because this highlights how the central banks have lost control of interest rates. They fuss and fret, and the media devotes lots of attention to 0.25% of the move on Fed funds. But look, we've seen 20 or nearly 25% rise in the 10-year bond, which is the most important interest rate in the world. So companies borrow against the 10-year bond. They have seen their costs going up by over 20%, and at the same time, they've seen their currency going down. So this is why we're getting emerging market bankruptcies, and this is going to spread because a lot of the money came out of the West in a pursuit of yield. So this is the background. Why is the oil price falling? Because there is too much of it. We don't need oil. I'm sorry, but we're moving on for environmental reasons and sustainability reasons. But if this is a chart from ExxonMobil from a couple of years ago, and you can see very clearly that the age of oil is past. Nobody today worries about coal. 30 years ago, we in the UK had massive strikes about coal. We couldn't do without it. We don't care. We don't have any coal today. Nobody notices. And this is what Saudi recognises, that in the future, in 20 years' time, there will be no great need for oil. We'll have moved to gas, we'll have moved to renewables, and energy efficiency will be very much higher. And Paris is all a part of this as well. And therefore, if you have the lowest cost production in the world and the second largest reserves, you are completely stupid if you hold the price. You have to adopt a market share policy, because if you don't monetize your product today, you will not be able to monetize it in 10 and 20 years' time. It's very, very simple. We know how this works in the chemical industry, and the Saudis know that too. So that's where we're going. That's why the oil price was an accident waiting to happen. And if we look at COP21, and this is the International Energy Agency's forecast back in the summer for oil demand, and I must admit, I look at this several times, and I think, am I reading this right? They are saying, even with the commitments made back in the summer, overall demand for oil by 2030 is only going to rise 9%. Now, you can read every analyst in the world, and they'll tell you we need shortages, we'll talk about shortages, we'll tell you that we need higher prices. It's all a load of nonsense. Nobody has done the numbers anymore. All they do is they watch what Janet Yellen is doing. Has she had a lovely morning? Did she have a nice breakfast? Are people being nice to her at lunch? That's what analysis has come to, and that is very dangerous for us. Give you a couple of examples of this. This is not difficult to do. This is not rocket science. You know, I've spent 30-odd years in the chemical industry. I worked for ICI, one of the biggest chemical companies in the world. This is what we were trained to do routinely as product managers. If you go to the Baker Hughes site, you will see that the kind of drilling that's being undertaken in the States has completely changed in the last 5 years. They are no longer using stripper wells, go up and down. They are using techniques from deep water, the rotary wells. As a result, productivity is climbing. Productivity in the gas industry in the States has already risen by 12-fold. 12-fold. Productivity in the oil industry has risen 4-fold. Well, of course we're not using more oil rigs. Of course the number of oil rigs is going to fall this afternoon when the new number comes out. It doesn't matter, because the oil rigs that are there are producing all that we need and more. In fact, if we sort of look at the next slide, they're not only producing all we need, but they're producing a lot more than we need. We have got record high inventories. It's quite likely next week that the US Congress will agree to actually allow the US to export. And all of that period since the Arab oil boycott in '73, all that will be history. And US oil will be coming onto the market. Already it's competing very strongly through condensate, as someone was saying earlier. The oil and energy markets are completely oversupplied, and they are going to be oversupplied for the next 10 or 20 years. And I think this is going to become quite common. The International Energy Agency has pointed out we have 3 billion barrels of inventory. We have vessels, we have 100 million barrels a day supply in floating storage. There is so little diesel storage available that ships are slow steaming around the Cape of Good Hope and elsewhere because there's nowhere to put it. So this is the reality, a vastly oversupplied energy market. No, actually, that is incredibly good news for chemicals, because that's what we need. And what we don't need, or what we didn't need, was this ridiculous situation that's lasted for far too long, where the gas price had already reacted to energy surplus in the States, but the oil price was held aloft by the antics of the financial players who were wanting a store of value against a declining dollar. This is where we go. If you look back, Winston Churchill, the great statesman, said that further back you look, the further forward you can see. And it's absolutely true with oil. If you take, obviously, the first few years, price history was pretty bumpy. But if you take all of that period and you strip out you can see those two periods of ultra-high prices, the average price has only been $26. If you include them if you include all the prices, it's only been $34. That's the price that the world can afford, something like 2 to 2.5% of global GDP. It can't afford it, so it doesn't continue. And that is a very obvious piece of analysis, and I hope that we'll get back to analysts instead of telling us, oh my goodness, the Dow share moved 0.1% yesterday. I hope we'll get back to this kind of analysis. What does this mean for ethylene capacity? Far too much ethylene capacity, I'm afraid. A vast surplus, not only in the States and very importantly, of course, if we look at the States in particular. Sorry to go through the slides a bit quickly, but we've got a minister coming, and I don't want to stand in the way of the minister, as you'll understand. That would not be good news. I can't understand. I worked for a very large company. I presented papers to the main board of ICI. I can't understand how anybody agreed to sanction investments in the US based on the fact that they have not been able to sell more ethylene for 10 years. The peak of ethylene production was over 10 years ago. The same peak of ethylene production was for polyethylene and the others. So you haven't been able to sell the same volume as you did 10 years ago, and yet you're expanding capacity by 45%. Oh, and by the way, your exports of polyethylene, the main derivative, have been falling since 2009. And as, of course, we all know, ethylene 21 is coming on stream at the moment, so that just removes another 1 million tons of exports. So this is complete nonsense, and I've been saying this for a couple of years, but nobody particularly wanted to listen because it sounded such a lovely idea. Oh yes, we're going to expand by 45%. But there's no point in expanding if you can't sell it. That's the problem. And we've seen exactly the same thing happen with propylene, that we've got vast LPG propane surpluses, and therefore we're getting on-purpose propylene for the first time in history. And what does this mean? It means that China's, which is particularly expanded in propane dehydro, China has expanded its production 28%, and it's going to continue to do that. So this means that propylene and polypropylene is going to go back to its role as the poor man's high-density polyethylene. And we're going to see massive dislocation and interpolymer competition, because polypropylene is going to be very cheap and very available, and so it's going to start taking, as you can see, a quote from our partners, ISIS, it's happening already in China. Polypropylene is going to start to take market share from high density, from PVC, from PET, and so on. And this is going to be a dogfight because there's too much of everything, and there will be for a very long time. Now, let's just go back to China and quickly what's been going on with President Xi Jinping here. Absolutely critical to understand. I used to work with ICI, with President Xi's father, and we admired him greatly. He built tens, after Deng came into power, he was put in charge of Guangzhou, and Xi Jinping built 10 cities the size of Hong Kong in 10 years. And this was the growth of China. But as you can see from state-owned media, this new normal policy has stopped all of that. It's not coming back. Why isn't it coming back? You can see here in the commodities, you've seen this chart 100 times, that all of these commodities are now collapsing. Many of them are below their prices of 5 or 6 years ago, and the ones that aren't there yet are going to be there fairly soon. And if you look at the new 5-year plan, what the new 5-year plan is talking about for China for 2016 to 2020 is two things. One, self-sufficiency. In other words, China does not want to be importing from anyone unless it has to. So it's going to run the factories that it's built, and it will export from them, and it's also got to clean up the environment. Sustainability, and that's a great opportunity for people outside China to help with that sustainability, because China, the two things that could lose China's Communist Party power, one is corruption, and two is the pollution. And if they don't clean that up, President Xi knows that this is going to be the end. Now, it's absolutely critical for Xi that he gets this finished, the worst of it over, next year. So there is going to be no recovery next year. Why do I say that? Because in the Communist Party, you get appointed for 5 years, and then you come up for a reappointment. And so Xi is due for reappointment in November 17 for his second 5-year term. Now, anybody in this room knows that what you do in those circumstances is you get all the bad news out of the way by the end of next year, so that in 2017, as you are putting yourself forward for reappointment, you can say, look, comrades, I was handed an absolute disaster. We've had to take some tough decisions. We've made those tough decisions. Don't worry. Now we have the new opportunities coming through. The Belt and Road Initiative, for example, a vast new initiative, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and so on. So we have green shoots coming forward. But this means that next year he's got to take all the painful decisions. People said, oh, no, he's going to lapse up. He's not. It's very clear that he won't, and he would be completely stupid if he didn't, and he's not stupid. Now, what this means, and this is a chart from the people who are writing the 5-year plan, what this means is that China's polyethylene imports are planned to stabilize at around today's levels, and China's polypropylene imports, and C3, are going to collapse. So this is what we mean by self-sufficiency, no opportunity to sell to China. So where is all this new capacity going to go? From the Middle East and everywhere else, and from the States and in Asia. There is nowhere for it to go because nobody can replace China in the way that it was. So that's the bad news. And one of the things we've gone through wars, we've gone through depressions and so on. This industry is very, very resilient. And we are turning a new page. This is why, in fact, with our friends at ISIS, we're producing this new study, which you may have seen in the ISIS magazine and so on. 5 critical questions. Very important. Will growth still be linked to GDP, for example? What is the policy on China going to mean for the chemical industry? What is going to happen to energy? These critical issues. What does oil at $25 mean? Well, I just want very quickly to talk about demographics, and actually this came up this morning. If you go back for years, centuries, nothing changed. Life expectancy stayed around the 30 years. It was a bit higher in the West, and it was a bit lower in the emerging economies like Brazil. GDP per capita, those of you who've got really good eyesight can see there was a green line there somewhere, but it was hardly anything. Then something quite remarkable happened. and somebody mentioned, as I say, this morning, suddenly, around 1700, 1800, around 300 years ago, something completely changed. Life expectancy began to increase, and GDP per capita began to increase. And I would argue that that longer life meant that adults were able to learn from experience, and children were able to be educated for the first time. If you look at old pictures, you generally see children dressed, if you go back 400 or 500 years, children dressed like they're adults. There wasn't a concept of childhood at that moment. Why did this happen? First of all, it happened in Turkey, with the wife of the British ambassador noticing that the Turks used to inhale the scabs of smallpox victims, and this seemed to give them some protection against smallpox. Why was that so important? Well, as Voltaire, the French scholar, said, 60% of people, 60% get smallpox and 20% die. When you went through major epidemics, 50 or 60% of all children under 5 would die. So we didn't get life expectancy increasing because you were wiped out by smallpox. So the Turkish idea worked to some extent, but far more important then was a little country doctor in Gloucester in the UK who noticed that milkmaids who worked with cows never seemed to get smallpox. And he deduced from that, one of the earliest bits of science, that cowpox must somehow give you immunity to smallpox. And he introduced this, and you can see how dramatically that changed life expectancy. And since then, as we've all been talking about right at the start today, vaccination, disinfection, chlorine probably the biggest single public health advance of the last century. No longer do you get cholera and typhoid from drinking water, which killed kings and queens just as it killed ordinary people. So cholera and typhoid, all of these things that we've brought through, pharmaceuticals and now healthy lifestyles, are changing the world, and life expectancy is rising all the time. So bring us right up to date then. Where are we today? If you go back to 1950, then what you saw was that the average woman in the world had around 5 babies per woman. So 5 babies. Today she has around 2.5. So the number of babies born to women has halved. At the same time, the life expectancy across the world has also increased by 50%, from 46 years up to 70 years. So what that means is, of course, that we had a vast number of babies coming through into their peak wealth-creating period, and now, with the benefit of longer life expectancy, they are not dying. Now, this is bad news for growth, I'm afraid, in the traditional way. If you want to have growth, you need to have all of your population, if you can, in that 25 to 54 age group. But we don't. So all of us who are over 55, I'm sorry, we've got to go out and commit suicide so that the central banks can get growth. Well, frankly, I'm not going to do it, and I don't expect any of you will either. So we need to adjust to this fantastic new opportunity that average Brazilian life expectancy today at age 65, according to the latest UN numbers, is 18 years. You're not retiring from a company and then dying. You've got another 18 years of life. So this is fantastic. And you can see that Brazil has been below replacement level in terms of number of babies. Replacement level is 2.1 babies per woman now for 25 or 30 years. So we haven't got that new generation of wealth creators, those in their 25 to 54 age group, coming through. We just haven't got them. So now we can say, oh, this is a disaster. It doesn't matter if it's a disaster for growth. What it shows us is fantastic opportunities for the future. 1 billion people in the world are joining this new old 55 plus demographic between 2000 and 2030. We are right in the middle of this most amazing change in the demographic profile of the world. And it's happening right across, it's happening everywhere, in Asia, in Latin America, just as it is in the developed countries. So what does this mean? This is the main growth cohort. If you want to sell anything in the future, you can't sell it to young people because there aren't any. I'm sorry, we have lost that growth mechanism because of the decline in fertility rates. But instead, and I am particularly grateful for this, and I know my friend Michelle is particularly grateful for this, we've got a good prospect, us 55 plus people, to have a future, and we would please please, companies in this room, would you like to think about the products and services that we want? Because we don't only want walking sticks and tablets. It's amazing. But if you talk to any CEO, we've been talking since we published the book about this for some time, I'll say, oh, yes, yes, they like, yes, 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 yes. But we don't. So could we please, this is where the growth is going to be. There's no point in trying to go back. Why would we want to? Why would we want to go back to the days where somebody retired from work and then went straight into the mortuary and died? We talked a bit about cars. I mean, I sat for 2 hours coming in from the airport yesterday. I really, Sao Paulo, which I used to come into the town airport, so Sao Paulo shows that you cannot just have more and more cars anymore. It doesn't work anymore. So we need new business models. If you look at the average car, apart from Sao Paulo, around the world, that not only does it cost a lot of money, but it's only driven for around an hour a day. Why on earth would we want to do that? We want mobility. We don't want cars. Now, Wolfgang was very, very modest. You know, Mercedes are doing a fantastic program of car sharing, car to go. I've used it myself. It works perfectly. It links in electronics and so on. BMW are doing the same. London and Paris are both doing state-sponsored car sharing schemes. And of course, the Google car, which I picture there, that self-driving would make things very much more efficient than everybody being stuck in traffic jams all the time. So what I'm arguing is that we're probably not going to see a lot of new cars being sold anymore, but cars will stay on the road. They last much longer. I don't have data for Brazil, but I'm sure it's in the same ballpark of around sort of 10 years in Europe and 12 years in the States. So there's a very big market, because used car markets are 2 to 3 times the new car market. So people are hanging on to cars longer. Why are we not doing new products and services to help keep those cars in the market? So why couldn't a Brazilian company start to develop? I mean, look at Embraer. Embraer is one of the most successful aerospace companies in the world because it spotted a niche that nobody else was bothered with, and it made it very successful, made it its own. And if we look at the retail industry for a moment, I show a picture there at the top of the plant where I started, Wilton, in the northeast, one of the big smokestack industry plants. And you can see in the retail industry, there is a big Walmart hypermarket. And all of the baby boomers, when we were young, we used to throw the kids in the back of the car, rush to the hypermarket, fill it up, take them back. Okay, you take them swimming, I'll take them to football. And we were time poor and cash rich. So that was worked for us. Now, when you go to be 55 plus, and you're moving into pension age, you actually become time rich and cash poor. So what are the supermarkets now doing? The expansion is in the local convenience stores. So why are we not expanding locally with lower risk, smaller scale investments? I happen to be chairman of a very exciting spin-out from Heriot-Watt University in Scotland called ENAIQ, and you can see one of our plants which replaced an existing plant that was about the size of this building. So there's lots of opportunities to replace very inefficient stirred tank reactors with modern continuous flow, very much cheaper and less energy and so on. So what I'm saying is to open our eyes to this new market, which is the billion people over the age of 55. They haven't got a lot of money, but they would like some products and services. Because I think this is the future, and this is really where I want to leave you, that we've been through 5 or 6 years now of stimulus, and it hasn't worked. It's pretty clear. But there are still people who are hanging on, saying, oh, well, it would be very awkward and it's very difficult to change. And I agree. None of us like change. But change is inevitable in the world, and the companies that are successful are the ones that adapt to change and move it forward. So if you look on the left, these are the symptoms of failure, if you like. If you look on the right, these are the characteristics of success for the future. That we know the future is going to be different, that we've got to realign our offerings with these key demographic drivers, so the aging boomers and greater domestic consumption in emerging economies like Brazil. Let's stop necessarily being an export-orientated economy. Let's actually look at the 210 million people who look in Brazil. Why cannot we design products and services that they can afford and that they need? And this is where I challenge current thinking, my final thought, where I challenge current thinking on megatrends. What I think is, and it did come across this morning, is that food water, health, shelter, and mobility. Those are really the underlying key megatrends of the future. And I'm pretty confident now, after 5 years now since we first published the book, and as I say, we've got this big new study coming out which is reinforcing our analysis, I'm pretty confident that companies that move in this direction will be the very successful companies of the future. Because you're not going to get it right the first time, that's okay, it doesn't matter. But there are so few people doing it that you can be successful even if you're not very good. And by the time the other people catch up, then you will find that you are knowing exactly what to do and you've become very good indeed. So my message as we come up to Christmas and New Year is it's going to be a difficult 2016, there's no doubt about that. The finance minister talked about crisis and so on. Yeah, we can't do much about that. But what we can do is how we respond for the future. Do we stick our heads in the sand and say it's all hopeless? Or, as I hope we do, can we actually say, look, there are lots of opportunities out there, let's get on and do some of them. Thank you very much indeed for your invitation.